There was a woman named Suzanne who lived in an old house on a cliff overlooking the sea. Suzanne had been deeply depressed ever since her son Bobby drowned. She was devastated by the loss and felt like she couldn't go on. As time went by, Suzanne began reading books about black magic and Satanism. The more she read, the more she became immersed in the world of the occult. It was like an addiction. She came across a spell that was supposed to be able to resurrect the dead. One dark night, she drew a pentagram on the floor of her living room. Lighting some black candles, she stood in the middle of the pentagram, and at the stroke of midnight, she read out loud from an ancient satanic book. "Come fulfill my desire, and do my bidding in accordance with my will. I conjure thee in the name of Satan, to whom all evil is obedient, by which name the earth is overthrown, the seas turn black, the ground shudders, fire is quenched, and all host of things in heaven and hell do tremble. Lucifer, prince of darkness, return my son who drowned by accident. Return him to me now. I command thee." Afterwards, Suzanne blew out the candles. She collapsed to her knees and began to weep. All of a sudden, she heard a faint scratching on her front door. Cautiously, she walked over to the door and listened. The scratching grew louder. "Who's there?" she cried. There was a long silence, and then she heard a voice whisper, "Mommy?" Suzanne opened the door and was shocked to see a small boy crouched on the doorstep. He was soaking wet and shivering with the cold. "Bobby?" she cried. "It's you. It's really you." She hurriedly brought him inside and put a towel around him, trying to warm him up. "I was so lonely and desolate without you, Bobby," she said. "Where were you? What happened?" "I remember water," he said. "Cold water, and I couldn't breathe. I woke up and couldn't remember who I was. I walked in the rain. These people found me and they took me in. I didn't know if I was alive or dead." "You're alive, Bobby," she cried. "You're really alive." "Was I a good boy, Mommy?" Bobby asked. "Of course you were a good boy," she replied. "Did you love me, Mommy?" Bobby asked. "I do love you," she replied. "From the bottom of my heart." "Were you nice to me, Mommy?" Bobby asked. "Of course I was," she said. Bobby stared at her. It was a mean, angry stare, and there was a spiteful sneer on his face. It frightened Suzanne. "I want to play a game with you, Mommy," he cried. "Hide and seek." All of a sudden, he raced up the stairs. All the lights in the house went out. "Bobby, what are you doing?" she cried. "Where are you?" There was no answer. "Bob, stop this," she cried. "I want you to come right back here. Bobby, please don't do this to Mommy." "Bobby, for the last time, what are you doing?" Just then, she heard the boy's voice coming from the darkness. "Aren't you glad the lights are out, Mommy?" he said. "It makes the game more fun." "You're going to hurt yourself in the dark," Suzanne replied. Suzanne cautiously walked up the stairs, feeling her way in the darkness. When she got to the top, she looked around, straining her eyes. "Bobby, stop this now," she shouted. "You're making Mommy very angry." All of a sudden, the door burst open and Bobby was standing there, cackling like a maniac. In his hand, he held a long, sharp kitchen knife. "Let's play hide and seek now, Mommy," he shrieked. Suzanne recoiled in horror, backing away. She tripped and went tumbling down the stairs. When she landed at the bottom, she looked up and saw her son coming down the stairs with the knife raised above his head. "You lied, Mommy," he said. "Bobby didn't really drown by accident. You knew that. Bobby drowned himself. He couldn't stand the way you treated him, and he killed himself just to get away from you. Don't you see? Bobby didn't want to come back, Mommy. No, Bobby hates you, Mommy. He didn't want to come back, so he sent me instead." Just then, there was a flash of lightning, and it lit up the house. For one terrible moment, Suzanne saw the face of the thing that had come back instead of Bobby. I will tell you a story about something terrible that happened on Halloween. This story is true, so they say, and it made my hair stand on end just to hear it. It happened many years ago in my town, which at the time was just a little town between the mountains of Catalonia, Spain. The town was little more than a small square with a church, a park, a prison, and a school, with all the houses clustered around. The town was very proud of their school since it was voted the best school in the province. It was the morning of October 31st, Halloween, and a class of students were doing arts and crafts in their classroom. Some were cutting skeletons out of sheets of paper, some were painting vampire bats, and others were drawing pumpkins. The students were all aged between 8 and 9 years old. Their teacher was a beautiful young woman who had only been working at the school for 1 month. While the children were having fun preparing Halloween decorations, the teacher turned on the radio to listen to the weather forecast. She was planning to organize an outdoor Halloween party for the kids later that day, and wanted to be sure that it wouldn't rain. Suddenly, the weather forecast was interrupted by a news bulletin. This is an important announcement. A convicted murderer has escaped from the local prison and is on the loose. He is described as armed and very dangerous. Please, do not attempt to apprehend him. The police will. The teacher rushed across the room and switched off the radio. She did not want to alarm the children, but it was too late. The children had all heard the broadcast and were very frightened by the news. They knew that the prison was very near the school. The teacher tried to reassure them and told them not to worry. A few minutes later, the school principal made an announcement over the intercom. "Attention all teachers. We have been informed that police are dealing with a very serious situation that is occurring right now in the town. All teachers are advised to lock the doors and windows of their classrooms until the police get this situation under control. I repeat, lock all doors and windows until further instruction. That is all." The teacher told the class to stay calm. She took out her key and locked the classroom door. Then she went around and closed every window, making sure that they were secured and nobody could get in. One little girl raised her hand and asked if she could go to the bathroom. The teacher didn't want to let her go, but the girl insisted. The teacher finally relented and gave her permission to go to the toilet. After all, it was unlikely that the murderer would come to the school. She told the girl that when she came back, she would have to give a secret knock at the classroom door. Then they would know that it was her and they can let her in. The code was 3 taps and 2 scratches. Tap, 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 scratch, scratch. The girl left to go to the bathroom and the teacher locked the door behind her. To take the children's minds off the scary situation, she started telling stories. After 20 minutes had passed and the girl still had not returned, the teacher began to get worried.
What's taking her so long?
She wondered out loud. Suddenly, they could hear footsteps in the corridor. Everybody in the classroom froze. Then they heard a noise at the door. Tap, tap, tap. Scratch, scratch.
She's back,
sighed the teacher in relief. She walked over, took out her key.
What if it's not her?
Asked one little boy who was shivering with fright. The teacher hesitated, her key inches from the lock. Again, they heard a noise at the door. Tap, 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 scratch, scratch.
It must be her,
said the teacher. She put the key into the door and unlocked it. Suddenly, the classroom door burst open, and a tall man was standing there. In his right hand, he was holding a knife, and in his left hand, he was holding the little girl's severed head. The escaped murderer came into the classroom, smiling from ear to ear. The children were trapped inside. All that could be heard in the corridors of the school were screams of terror and squeals of pain. In the chaos, the teacher managed to break a window and jump out. She barely escaped with her life and crawled to safety. The children, however, were not so lucky. When the police arrived, they found the murderer sitting in the middle of the classroom. The floor, walls, and ceiling were covered in blood. Little body parts lay scattered around him. He had chopped up every child in the class into tiny pieces. They found the headless body of the little girl in the third stall of the bathroom. The police figured out what had probably happened that cold October day. The escaped prisoner must have been hiding in the toilet when the girl was asking for permission to go to the bathroom. He must have surprised her in the stall and forced her to tell him the password. When she did, he cut off her head. Today, the teacher is in a psychiatric hospital. She never recovered from the incident and can't stop repeating over and over again, tap, 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 scratch, scratch. Tap, 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 scratch, scratch. The school was abandoned because parents refused to send their children there. There were too many bad memories. The school was left just the way it was when the murders occurred. They say that if you visit the old school building and go into the classroom, you can still see the blood still dripping down the walls. If you are brave enough, you could even go to the bathroom. Just tap 3 times and scratch 2 times on the door of the third stall. Then open it. You will see the headless body of the little girl sitting on the toilet. A young woman had just finished nursing school and started working in a hospital. Although she loved her job as a nurse, she found it difficult to get along with the people she worked with. They were mostly young doctors who had just finished medical school. The problem was that they delighted in pulling pranks on each other. She found it very difficult to live with them in the residence next to the hospital, because they stayed up late at night and made too much noise. The nurse worked very long hours and needed all the sleep she could get. Whenever she complained about their behavior, the mischievous doctors just laughed in her face and told her to shut her mouth. The nurse eventually had to report the young doctors to the hospital manager, and they got in all sorts of trouble. The doctors began to really hate the nurse and spent days devising a plan to get revenge on her. Finally, one of the doctors came up with a really sick prank they could play on the nurse, and the others gleefully agreed to help. That night, they broke into a mortuary in a hospital basement and sawed the arm off of a corpse. Then, they sneaked it into the nurse's bedroom and put the severed arm under her bedclothes. They placed it at the bottom of the bed so that when she lay down, her foot would touch it. Chuckling to themselves, they stood around in the hallway waiting for the young nurse to go to bed. As the girl went into her bedroom, the doctors had to stop themselves from laughing out loud. The nurse was suspicious of their behavior, but she was too tired to care and went into her bedroom, closing the door behind herself. The men waited impatiently in the hallway for the nurse to react. There were no screams, no angry yells, only silence. After a while, the doctors got fed up of waiting and decided to turn it in for the night. They assumed that they had placed the severed arm too far down in the bed, and the nurse must not have felt it. The next morning when they woke up, the doctors went to check on the nurse. Receiving no answer when they knocked on the door, they turned the handle and went inside. The room seemed to be completely empty with no sign of the nurse. The doctors searched the nurse's bedroom, and when they opened the closet door, they were greeted by a horrible sight. The nurse was curled up in the corner of the closet. Her hair had turned completely white. Her eyes were rolled back in her head, and she had gone insane. Her face looked like it had aged 20 years. Worst of all, she was chewing on the severed arm.
Last Halloween, I was waiting at my front door, giving out Halloween candy to trick-or-treaters all evening. Some children came alone. Some were accompanied by parents. When they held out their bags, I happily dropped the sweets and treats inside. As it grew dark, things started to die down. When it seemed like nobody else was going to come, I decided to call it a night. I was just about to turn my porch light off and go to bed when there was a knock at my front door. It seemed much too late for children to still be out, but I grabbed a handful of candy and opened my front door. There were 2 children standing on my porch, but they weren't wearing costumes. They were the strangest children I had ever seen in my life. Their skin was waxy and ghostly white. Their eyes were completely black. Their teeth were jagged and too big to fit their mouths. The entire look was more disturbing than anything I had ever seen before. But their clothes were just plain, ordinary shirts and pants. Confused, I asked them, "What are you supposed to be? Some kind of monsters?" "No," said the children as their mouths widened into broad, leering grins. "Tonight, we're dressed as humans." Filled suddenly with the chilling sense of impending doom, I slammed the door and locked it tight. Through the peephole, I could see the 2 strange trick-or-treaters standing outside the door, motionless. Then they began pounding on the door and telling me to let them in. The door shook and seemed like it was about to fall off its hinges. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. When I looked out through the peephole, they were gone. The street outside was deserted. I don't know about you, but this Halloween, I won't be opening my door for anyone.